My name is Jordan Weissman. I'm a game designer and entrepreneur. I've been making games for about 35 years, about half on the tabletop and half on computers. And I've had the pleasure of creating a very wide variety of different types of games over the years, and some franchises that thankfully people still care about. In the early 80s, there was a number of animated TV shows in Japan that were starting to use these giant robotic characters, and I was very impressed by the visuals of those, but wanted to create a story that was less fantastical, less magical, more kind of grounded in the kind of Western history and Western kind of view of equipment, right? Rather than kind of viewing technology as this magical thing. I wanted to actually create a world where the technology was declining in sophistication. So something backwards to what we were experiencing in the 80s, which was this, rapid increase in technological sophistication. I thought it'd be fun to look at a period of time, which has happened in human history, where we're actually in a technological slide. We're going backwards. And so I thought it'd be fun to put these mechs in that context and treat them as kind of giant suits of armor, and so that was kind of the original inspiration point. And then from there, I'm a huge fan of history, so everything in the BattleTech storyline was inspired by different historical episodes. So it was kind of, I could go on forever, but that's a good starting point. Yeah. I never expected 35 years later to be talking about BattleTech or creating yet more in the universe. The fact that we've been creating BattleTech books and games for 35 years is mind-blowing. I never would have anticipated that. And the timeline evolved in all sorts of different ways over the course of the intervening 35 years. One of the reasons I went back to the beginning of the timeline for the setting of this computer game is because it's like joining a soap opera. That's several years in, they tend to get more complex. The stories, the number of characters, the motivations tend to get more and more involved as a storyline develops over years. And I felt that the initial setting with the 5 noble houses and the kind of exhaustion after the third succession war, so that you didn't have giant armies, you had a situation where a small mercenary unit could actually exert significant influence on a localized geopolitical situation, would be more accessible to both returning fans as well as new people who hopefully will encounter the game. Yeah, and I think one of the reasons we chose to set the game in the periphery with those smaller geopolitical units, the small bandit kingdoms, and the small star systems that are star kingdoms that are only a handful large, is because we could exert more influence there as a small unit. And then as you grow in reputation, you start to, even in that environment, start to encounter House Davion and House Lao most prominently because they're the ones nearest by. But even outreachers from Krita and from Steiner and Marek, who are messing in the politics of the periphery, much like how the Soviet Union and the United States would mess in the politics of South America or Africa during the Cold War, right? They would be playing in those local governments, and I think that's how we'll start to encounter them. And then hopefully in success, if the game is well received, then we can start to expand the amount of space and your engagement with those noble houses as we move through the timeline. Well, yeah, each location you go to, you as the player determine which star system you want to go to, and there's all the jump costs and times, just like in the fiction in the tabletop game. But each one you go to then will have a hiring board from the mercenary, they used to call it the merc board, right? Where different people who are looking to hire mercenaries will be post their job offerings. And so each system will have a different assortment of job offerings. And by which ones you choose to accept, you start to build reputations with those different geopolitical forces in the area. We refer to those as kind of design pillars, and a handful of the design pillars that were important to us were, one, it needed to really feel like BattleTech, right? Even though we knew we were going to have to do some updating to some of the different mechanics, at the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that an old loyal follower and player of the tabletop game would come away feeling that felt like BattleTech, that my tactics worked, all the experience I've built over the years is valid, you know. And so that was kind of number one. Number two was that the lore and the world of BattleTech, that we wanted to make sure we really respected that, like we did with the Shadowrun titles, to make sure that we weren't going in and changing big things or rewriting the story in significant ways. We wanted to make sure that again, we respected the 35 years of storytelling. The next one for us was to make sure that the game was very accessible, right? We're in a renaissance of tactical games, and larger audiences are becoming interested in turn-based and in tactical, and we wanted to make sure that this game was accessible to that new audience, not just for the older audience. There were some shortcomings in the old game, and I can call my own baby ugly more than maybe others could. But one of the challenges we've had in the BattleTech and MechWarrior world overall, in the gameplay, is that the light mechs and the medium mechs didn't really fulfill the roles that they did in the fiction. In the fiction, they have very identified roles as scouts and as kind of recon medium units. In the tabletop, and even in many of the computer games, they were just kind of things you used until you could get to heavies and assaults, because they really didn't play that role, So that was one of the big things for us, was to really make sure that those guys had useful and identifiable roles to play on the battlefield. And I think that's a lot what drove us towards things like the initiative system, and some of the skills and the sensor, the way that the scouting works and forward observing works, and was to really give those guys those kind of capabilities. And then, of course, storytelling, right? We love telling stories in these worlds. The Shadowrun series is an example of that, and even though this one isn't an RPG, it is a tactical game, we wanted to make sure that there was a good immersive story that was true to the lore. Of course, yes.
Oh, yes.
You can do a Death from Above, absolutely. And one of the MechWarrior abilities, Death from Above, if you remember from the board game itself, it's a risky maneuver, but you can certainly do it. And then there's a MechWarrior ability called the Angel of Death, which means that pilot is very specialized in it, so it becomes a little less risky to do. But yeah, by all means, you can do it.